Hello, everyone.
Hi, Andrea.
Hey there.
Hello, good night.
Good evening.
Hi.
Hey there. Okay, guys, first of all, I'm sorry for the delay. I was having some problems joining the meeting. And second, please don't forget to turn your cameras on. Okay, guys, thank you so much. All right. So today and this week, we're going to be working on the listening section. We will start on the second section of the test, which is the listening section. So everything that you guys will be doing in the listening is pretty much listening to some audio files and then answering questions about the files or the content of them. All of the questions that you have here in the listening section are multiple choice, which means that, well, you have 4 options, usually A, B, C, D, and A, B, C, D, and E, and you need to choose the correct answer. Okay, guys, they're all multiple choice. So let's talk a little bit about the format of the listening section. Okay. Now, currently, and this is the current format of the test right now, if you take the test before July the 26th, then this is the structure that you will have for the listening section. What happens is, technically, you should only have 5 different tasks or 5 sets of questions, let's say. Okay. But you will always have, if you take the test before July the 26th, there are going to be some unscored extra questions that are not scored. I think they use for testing. And, well, you could get these extra questions either in the reading section or in the listening section. So if you didn't get them in the reading section, then you will have them here in the listening section, and that will be 2 extra sets of questions, and you will end up having 7 tasks or 7 sets of questions. But if you have the extra questions in the reading section, you will only have 5 in the listening. So it depends on where you have your extra questions. It could be in the listening or it could be in the reading. If you have them in the listening, you will have 7 sets of questions. But if you have them in the reading, you will only have 5 in the listening. Okay, so I just think about it like technically you're supposed to have 5, but there's a chance that you have 2 extra sets. Okay. What you will be having in the listening section is basically conversations and lectures as part of the content. And depending on how many questions you have, that means depending on whether you have the extra questions here or not, you could have 41 minutes for the entire listening section, or you could have 57 if you have the extra questions. Okay, so to summarize, in the listening section, you can have 5 or 7 sets of questions. Both of them are going to be about conversations and lectures. If you have 5, then you get 41 minutes, and if you have 7, you get 57 minutes. Okay, guys? This is only if you take the test before July the 26th. Is this okay so far? Do you have any questions about this format? Okay. Now, in case you take the test after July the 26th, then what will change is that you won't have any of these extra questions, any of these extra tasks. That means that no matter like if you have them in the reading or not, you will always have 5 tasks or 5 sets of questions. That's the difference between the new and the current TOEFL test, is that in the new test, you don't have these extra questions. So it's just going to be 5 sets of questions and 41 minutes to answer them all. Okay, guys? Now, one thing that I want to say, and I want to be really clear about now, is that the time that you have, the time that you get, is for the entire listening. You won't get different or separate timers for each passage or for each conversation or each lecture. So it's completely up to you how you use this time, how you manage the time. You can spend 1 minute in a question or you can spend 5 minutes in one. It's totally up to you how you organize your time. Now, obviously, we want to be efficient and we don't want to waste time in one question, but instead we want to distribute this time proportionally, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to have approximately, this is an approximate, per conversation, we should be having 5 minutes, okay? 5 minutes each conversation. So that's going to be, let's say, 10 minutes here. And per lecture, you guys should be having at least 6 minutes. Okay, so that's going to be 18 minutes here. So that would be an ideal way of organizing your time, because these 41 minutes are going to be including the conversations and the lectures themselves. So the rest of the time is going to be distributed into what you need. Okay. Now, obviously, you can use more time, you can use less time. To be honest, I won't be being, I'm not going to be so, I won't be so, I won't insist too much on the time thing, because as from what I've seen personally in most students' cases, students don't usually struggle with time here in the list. Because the thing is, you get the question and you either know the answer or you don't. You don't have the chance to listen again to the audio file. So there's nowhere to get lost. You either know the answer or you don't, and you gotta move on if you don't know the answer, right? So there's not much to say about the time. So is this okay so far? Do you guys have any questions before we continue? Okay, guys. So I was telling you we're gonna have to see two different things. We will be seeing lectures and conversations. Today and tomorrow we'll be focusing mainly on the conversations part. So we'll just be looking at conversations, and on Thursday and Friday we'll be doing lectures. Okay, so let's start today with the conversations. How many conversations will you have? 2 or 3, right? Depending if you have the extra one or not. Each conversation is usually about 3 minutes long. This is an average. It could be more, it could be less. And you have 5 questions per conversation. Okay, so 5 questions per conversation. In the conversations you're gonna hear, I'm sorry, you're only gonna hear 2 people speak. Give me a second, please. Sorry. In each conversation, you're just gonna hear 2 people speaking, so 2 speakers, okay, with each other. So again, you have 2 or 3 conversations. Each one is about 3 minutes long, and you get 5 questions per conversation. So let's see how these conversations are like. Basically, the context for these conversations is I want you guys to imagine that you are in an American university, okay? You're part of a university in the US. This conversation is gonna take place inside X university, an American university, and it will be held between a student from that university and somebody who works for the university. Okay, so that means that you will have a student from the university and what we're gonna call a campus worker. So somebody that works for the university. For example, you could have a student, any student from the university, and maybe a professor, right? Remember that professors are university teachers, right? So you can have a student and a professor talking in this conversation. It could also be a student and let's say, I don't know, a librarian, okay? Because the librarian works for the university. Can you guys think of anybody else that could work in the university? Who else works for universities?
Probably a secretary.
I'm sorry, secretary? Okay, yeah, that's correct. It could be a secretary too. Else? Who else works in universities? Maybe we could say it could be a student, an academic advisor, for example, right? It could be an advisor. It could be the accommodation officer. Anyone really that works for the university. So now you're probably wondering, how is this important? Why should I know this? I'm gonna give you guys 2 tips or 3 tips here. The first one is gonna be, given that these conversations are gonna be about university life, I really highly suggest that you try to, first of all, understand how university works in the US, because these are the American universities. And you probably know that they work differently than they work here, right? So for example, one big difference is that students tend to live inside the universities, right, in the US. So that's one difference that we have if we compare it to South American universities. Another difference would be, given that the students tend to live on campus, then they have access to a variety of different services, right? Related, for example, to accommodation, related to having, bus services, like recreation services. So it's important that you guys understand how university life works in the US. And second, it's also important that you have some vocabulary related to university life, right? You should know, for example, what a dormitory is, right? What a dorm is. You should know what an ER is, for example. You should have vocabulary related to university life. Because if you don't, then maybe when you're listening to the conversations, you're gonna be a little bit lost because you're not familiar with those words related to university life. So my suggestion, I'm gonna share with you guys a word list containing some expressions related to university. But in general, I suggest that maybe you try to, I don't know, there are many podcasts that talk about university life, for example. You can listen to those podcasts and that will help you grow your vocabulary in this specific area. Okay, guys, that's gonna be the first tip. Be familiarized with how university works in the US and also with vocabulary related to college life, all right? And the second thing that I could tell you is, when you're answering the questions that you get for the conversations, try to always make it make sense. Because, for example, if you know that it's a conversation between a student and a professor, then it's probably going to be about something related to the academic life, right? So it's going to be about grades, about exams, about research papers, assignments, so and so forth. If it's a conversation between the student and a librarian, then it's probably going to be about anything related to books and research and the library itself, right? So make sure that you make the questions make sense, and that sometimes you will see that it's really helpful to try to be logical and approach the questions in a logical way, okay? So those would be the 2 things that I could tell you. One more thing, what are the conversations going to be about? You have 2 different options. The first one is problem solution or problem advice, let's say. So how does this work? Basically, the student has a problem and the student goes to see this person, this campus worker, to ask for advice. So for example, maybe the student is having a problem finding a book. So the student goes to see the librarian, and the librarian is going to provide the student with some advice on what he or she can do to solve the problem. Maybe the student, I don't know, like is struggling with an assignment. So the student is going to go see the professor to discuss the assignment. So this is one of the most common types of conversations, problem and advice. But there's another as well, which is basically just the student needing something. So maybe the student wants or needs to, I don't know, needs to see something about accommodation. Maybe the student wants to find a place to stay in the university. So the student will go see the accommodation office. Maybe the student needs information about classes. So the student will go see the advisor, okay? So it's always gonna be like that. The student either wants something or needs something or has a problem, and the professor, the librarian, the secretary, whoever it is that we have on the other side, is supposed to help the student with whatever it is the student wants. Okay, guys? That's how the conversation goes. Is it okay so far? Do you have any questions now? Okay, guys, perfect. Let's see. Okay. As for the question types, well, I should tell you that there are different question types that you have in the conversations. For example, you have some questions that require you to take really good notes. Those are the detailed questions, right? That ask you about specific details about the conversation. Like, what was the name of the professor? What time should the student come back? What was the professor's advice? I don't know. So they ask you for specific details. But there are most of the questions that don't really require to like remember every single detail, but instead are more about the big ideas. And that's usually the majority of the questions. For example, you have attitude questions that ask you about how students are feeling or how the speakers are feeling, right? What's the professor's attitude towards this? What's the student opinion? How is the student feeling about that? There are other questions that ask you about the main ideas, the main idea of the conversation, the main idea of the lecture, depending on what we are or where we are. Other questions ask you about the reason why somebody said something or the meaning of something beyond the words. Those are called function and purpose. And they ask you about the reason or what the student or the speaker meant when saying something. So usually these are the ones that you have the most when dealing with conversations, but I'm not gonna get into detail about this, okay? Because I think it's better to just look at examples and we're gonna learn the question types as we go. And I'm gonna give you tips about like for each one as we go, okay? But it's better to see them with actual examples. So we're not gonna do that. And yes, I'll give you some tips as we go. As for your note taking, you guys should be wondering, so should I take notes? My answer is gonna be it depends. It depends on each student. My best suggestion is to take notes, but first try to have your notes in an organized way. When it comes to the conversations, I would suggest that you take notes like this. So let's say this is your piece of paper. What you guys have to do is divide it into two different boxes and try to have the information that you get separately. That means that maybe one box is going to be for the student and the other one is going to be for the campus work, right? The university work. So in this way, you will have the information separated, right? First, you maybe write down whatever it is the main topic of the conversation is. Let's say the student, I don't know, has problem finding a book. So there's this book that's called, I don't know, and then you write the name of the book and the student can't find the book. So you take notes on whatever the student says. And then when the university worker responds, then you write down anything that you consider is important to remember, right? So maybe the university worker asks the student if the student has used, I don't know, the search engine, let's say. Okay. And then the student replies, right? And the student maybe is, I don't know, the student doesn't feel like that's a good idea, or maybe the student has already tried that. So you're gonna go back and forth between what the student is saying and the university work. Okay, that way your information will be separated and organized. And my suggestion is don't write notes on the big ideas because that's something that's gonna stick with you. That's something that you will remember. Instead, if you guys are gonna take notes, then take notes on the details, on the things that are actually hard to remember. Things like names, dates, numbers, statistics, like anything that you wouldn't remember normally, right? Because it's hard to remember a name, it's hard to remember, but the big ideas are gonna stick with you. So that would be my suggestion. Take notes in an organized way and only take notes for the details because the ideas you will remember. And another suggestion that I can give you guys is try to practice doing different strategies. So I have personally seen some students that do better when they don't take notes, any notes at all, because sometimes it can be overwhelming to be listening and paying attention and understanding the content and at the same time taking notes. So there are some students who have really good memory and don't need to take any notes. So in order to find out what type of student you are, you should be trying different strategies. So do one practice where you only take a few notes. Do another one where you don't take any notes. Do another one where you take more notes and see which one works better for you. Okay, you will realize what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and that's how you know what strategy to use the day of your test. So try different things until you get to the right strategy. Okay, my suggestion would be to create a balance. I would take notes, but I wouldn't create a transcript. I would try to just write down the important details. Okay, guys? And that is it. That's basically, I think, one of the most important things that I could say for this conversations part. To be honest, I would say this is like the easiest part for most students, obviously not all, but I guess most students find this to be the easiest part of the entire test. So take advantage of that. I think you can all get a perfect score, at least in the conversations part of the listening, because it's something very basic. You will see the vocabulary is easy to understand. The way they speak is quite like easy to follow as well. The questions are relatively simple. They won't ask you for like relevant details, but they mostly focus on big ideas. So that's what I could say. What questions do you guys have? What comments do you have? Anything you want to ask before we actually take a look at an example? No questions? Are you ready to see an example? Okay, guys. So we're gonna do an example now, and we're gonna be seeing the types of questions as we go. Another thing that I forgot to say is when you guys are practicing, make it realistic. That means practice the way that you would in the actual test. So for those of you who are taking the test at home or who are planning on taking the test at home, then I highly suggest that you start practicing taking your notes the way that you will in the test. How will you take notes in the test if you take the test at home? You have to either use a whiteboard, okay? So whiteboard, una pizarra, right? So if you guys are gonna take the test at home, then you need to use one of these. It has to be a small whiteboard, of course, and you need to write your notes with a watermark, right? That's erasing. And if you don't wanna do this, then you can also use a transparent sheet. Which is basically these ones here. Let me show you a picture. So these are called these transparent sheet covers, right? What you can do according to the ETS policies is, well, have a piece of paper and put it inside of one of these transparent sheets, okay? And with a water marker, you can write down your notes and a piece of paper, I don't know, like a piece of toilet paper or any type of clothing can be used to erase the notes. So you could take notes in both ways if you take the test at home. Those are the two only valid ways of taking the test at home. You are not supposed to have actual pen and paper, okay? So if you plan on taking the test at home, then start practicing like this now, because it's a different experience to take notes, like to type your notes, to write your notes on normal paper, and to write your notes on this type of thing. So start practicing like you will in the actual test. And if you guys will take the test in a test center, then you just take your notes on normal paper, okay? So you don't have to worry that much about anything, but you shouldn't be typing your notes, okay? That's a no-go, definitely, because no matter where you take the test, you're never gonna type your notes on a computer, or you're not gonna use an iPad or anything. So practice realistically, okay? Believe it or not, this can impact your score as well. So get used to the way you're gonna take the test. Is this okay as well? Any questions now? Then in that case, okay, I'm gonna, sorry, I got ahead. So please get ready to take notes. I know that right now you may not have a whiteboard or a transparent sheet, but for now it's okay if you practice taking your notes by hand, okay? So please get ready to take notes. I'm gonna play our first conversation, and we're gonna see the question types as we go. Okay, guys? So get a piece of paper, get a pen, because I'm gonna play our first conversation. By the way, we're practicing with official material. This is from the ETS website. You can find this practice online. And we're doing this in order to get as close as we can to the real, question types that you get in the real test, right? So let's see what we have.
Listening section directions. The listening section of the TOEFL IBT test measures your ability to understand conversations and lectures in English.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor Mason. Do you have a minute?
Yes, of course, Eric. I think there was something I wanted to talk to you about, too.
Probably my late essay.
Ah, that must have been it. I thought maybe I'd lost it.
No, I'm sorry. Actually, it was my computer that lost it, the first draft of it. And, well, anyway, I finally put it in your mailbox yesterday.
Oh, and I haven't checked the mailbox yet today. Well, I'm glad it's there. I'll read it this weekend.
Well, sorry again. Say, I can send it to you by email, too, if you like.
Great. I'll be interested to see how it all came out.
Right. Now, I just overheard some graduate students talking. Something about a party for Dean Adams?
A retirement party, yes. All students are invited. Wasn't there a notice on the anthropology department's bulletin board?
I don't know, but I wanted to offer to help out with it. You know, whatever you need. Dean Adams, well, I took a few anthropology classes with her, and they were great, inspiring. And, well, I just wanted to pitch in.
Oh, that's very thoughtful of you, Eric, but it'll be pretty low-key. Nothing flashy. That's not her style.
So there's nothing?
No, we'll have coffee and cookies. Maybe a cake, but actually a couple of the administrative assistants are working on that. You could ask them, but I think they've got it covered.
Okay.
Actually, oh, no, never mind.
What is it?
Well, it's nothing to do with the party, and I'm sure there are more exciting ways you could spend your time, but we do need some help with something. We're compiling a database of articles the anthropology faculty has published. There's not much glory in it, but we're looking for someone with some knowledge of anthropology who can enter the articles. I hesitate to mention it, but I don't suppose this is something you would...
No, that sounds kind of cool. I'd like to see what they're writing about.
Wonderful. And there are also some unpublished studies. Did you know Dean Adams did a lot of field research in Indonesia? Most of it hasn't been published yet.
No, like what?
Well, she's really versatile. She just spent several months studying social interactions in Indonesia, and she's been influential in ethnology. Oh, and she's also done work in South America that's closer to biology, especially with speciation.
Not to seem uninformed.
Well, how species form. You know, how two distinct species form from one, like when populations of the same species are isolated from each other and then develop in two different directions and end up as two distinct species.
Interesting.
Yes. And while she was there in South America, she collected a lot of linguistic information and songs. Really fascinating.
Well, I hate to see her leave.
Don't worry, she'll still be around. She's got lots of projects that she's still in the middle of.
Hey guys.
Why does the man go to see the professor?
Okay, so that was the conversation. Although technically you would have limited time, right now let's talk a little bit first about the conversation. What do you guys thought about it? What did you think about like the speed? Was it easy to understand? Was the vocabulary okay for you? Was the content maybe a little too complicated, too technical? Were you able to understand at least the main ideas? How was your process of taking notes? What do you guys think?
The first option.
Yes, the first one.
No,
Oh, the first. The option.
the right one.
But I'm not asking about this question yet, right? I was asking you about the listening. What did you think of the listening?
The second part of the conversation, I consider that it was a little bit technical vocabulary. I didn't get the ideas, but I'm not sure. But the first part, I consider that it was a little bit clearer than the second part.
Okay, Karina, yes, that's right, because they kind of, in this conversation, they talked about different things, right? It wasn't just one topic. You had different topics, actually. And that's something very common in the conversation. Sometimes they start talking about something and they end up talking about something entirely different. And yeah, it did get a little bit technical when they were talking about all the work, the ethnological work, right? Or the anthropological work that Dean Adams, I think, did. So yeah, it may get a little bit technical, but one thing that I could say is that they're probably not going to ask us anything about the technical parts. They're going to focus on our understanding or measuring our understanding of the big ideas. So it's okay if there were words that you didn't understand because they were too technical, but the important thing is that you do understand the big ideas and the big picture. Any other thing you guys want to share, you want to say? Okay, guys, now let's take a look at the questions. This is the first question. It says, why does the man go to see the professor? This is the first question that you always get, and it's called the main idea type of question. Okay? Now, there are two types of main idea questions. There's one type that asks you about the main idea, really. So they ask you to summarize the entire conversation. And that question is usually phrased like, what is the conversation about? Okay, so that's the first type of main idea question, where they ask you to summarize the entire conversation. So in that case, you would have to talk about, or you have to find an option that summarizes everything that was covered in the conversation, right? In this case, they talked about two different things. One was the party, and the second one was, well, they actually talked about three things, right? They talked about the essay first, then they talked about the party, and finally they talked about the project that the woman is working on. So you would have to find an option that summarizes everything that was said in the conversation. But there's also another type of main idea question, which is the basically, I guess we could say the purpose of the conversation. let's say the original reason. Okay, so what do I mean by that? This is an example of the second type. Because if you think about it, they're not asking you to summarize the entire conversation. They are asking, why does the man go to see the professor initially, right? In the beginning. Why does the student go to see this person? What was the purpose of the conversation in the beginning? Why did the man go to see the professor or the campus worker in general? And in that case, you don't have to summarize the entire conversation because they could talk about the assignment, they could talk about the Dean Adams research, they could talk about the event, they could talk about jobs, but what you have to do is select the option that talks about the initial intent of the conversation. Okay, so you're probably gonna find the answer to that question in the first minute of the conversation. So in this case, you guys were telling me the third option to discuss Dean Adams' current research? Or which option are you guys seeing?
The first.
Okay, the first option, to hand in a late assignment. Yes, do you guys agree? Are you sure? So I don't know. We're gonna select that one, but I think I don't agree with you guys. We're gonna show the answer. Technically, when you're taking the test, you have the options of reviewing the questions. So that means that you can go, I'm sorry, you don't have these options at all, and you just have these ones here. Okay, so you cannot go back to a previous question. You can only go forward. So you can click on next and move on to the next question. But you can never go back, or you can never jump around the questions and change your answers. Okay, that's important to consider. Now, in this case, obviously you won't have this option in the real test, but right now we have it. We're gonna show the real answer. So it was actually option D, to volunteer to help organize an event. Now, can you guys tell me why? Why it's option D and not A?
Because the person who mentioned the assignment first was the teacher.
Exactly. Yes, perfect, Sophia, thanks. That's right. So if you guys remember the conversation, the student goes to see the professor and the student doesn't say anything, but the professor is like, hey, I actually wanted to talk to you about something. And then they start talking about the assignment, right? But it was the professor that brought up the topic of the assignment. The student didn't go see the professor to discuss the assignment. The professor brought that up, but the student in reality said, well, actually, I came here because I wanted to volunteer to help organize the party that they're throwing to for Dean Adams, right? That was the reason why the student went to see the professor. Not to hand in the late assignment, that was something the professor mentioned, but instead to volunteer to help organize the party, right? Do you guys remember that? Yes, do you all remember? So that's the tip that I was telling you, right? When you have, this is a main idea question that's asking about the original purpose, why the student went to see the campus work. So think about the reason why the student went to see the professor, right? Not really what they talked about, because they could have talked about all of the options, but the real reason why he went to see the professor was to volunteer, right? That's the correct answer. Let's click on the next.
How did the man learn about Dean Adams's retirement?
So this is what we call a detailed question, because they're asking for one specific detail. How, why, when, where, what, right? They're asking for something specific. It's a detailed question. Now, this is a question that does require to have good notes and also to have good memory. So what do you guys think? How did the man learn about Dean Adams' retirement?
He heard other students discussed it.
Yes, do you guys agree?
Yes.
Okay, good. So the tip that I can give you guys for detailed questions, aside from practicing your note-taking skills, because taking good notes is essential to answer these questions correctly, is when you're looking at the question, make sure that you select a choice that is not just true. Because, for example, option B, this is correct, right? This is correct, true information. This was actually posted on the bulletin board, but you have to make sure that you select a choice that answers the question directly. So how did the man learn? Even though it was posted on a bulletin board, the student didn't learn about the party that way. The student learned about the party because he heard other students discussing it. So to be honest, the only two, even like, and this is like a trick, you know, even just by reading the options, if I didn't know anything, I would tend to think that options A and C make more sense because those are directly answering the question, right? How did the man learn? He read about it, he heard about it. Those are the two direct answers we have. Options B and D are not direct answers. So that's one tip that I can give you here. Make sure that you don't choose options that are true because they're true, but instead you choose options that are directly answering the question, you know? And obviously it has to contain correct, accurate information. And in this case, it is option C. He heard other students discussing it. Let's show the answer. Yes, that's correct. Any questions so far? Okay, let's click on next.
Why does the professor refuse the man's offer to help with the party?
This is another detailed question. When, where, what, why, how? Now, why does the professor refuse the man's offer to help with the party? It's another detail. In this case, they are telling you to click on two answers. So you have two correct choices out of this four. So we have two reasons why the professor refused the man's offer. What are those? What do you guys think?
The first and the third one.
Okay, do you guys agree?
Yes, the first, but I think it's the second, but I don't know.
The second.
I think it's the second and the third.
So in this case, I would agree with Alejandra. I think it's the first and the third. So what she explicitly said, I remember her words, it was like, well, I think we're doing something really low key, she said, right? Professors or Dean Adams doesn't really like big things. So we're not doing anything flashy, anything big. We're just gonna have coffee and cookies, right? I think that's what she said. That was one reason why she basically saying that they don't need his help, right? Because it's something very small, very low key. And that's option C. The party does not require much preparation. It's just coffee and cookies. And the second reason, and what she says is also, I think two people from administration are already working on the party. So you could ask them, but I don't think they need any help. That's what she said, right? So the party is something that doesn't require much preparation. And second, two people are already preparing the party. So they probably don't need any help. Now, that's exactly what she said, right? She said it's something low key, it's not anything big, and two people are already working on it. She explicitly said that. Now, option B would be you guys making an inference. We could come to the conclusion of option B, right? If you guys think about it and you want to draw conclusions, you can be like, okay, maybe she said that not because two people are already working on the party, but because she wants the student to work on the project. But if you chose that option, what you would be doing is to draw an inference, to draw conclusions, to come to a conclusion based on the information. But that's not what you guys have to do for this question. And that's going to be the same for the reading section. If you guys remember, those of you who have seen the reading section already, there are two different types of questions. One is detailed questions, and the other one is inference questions. So if this question was differently phrased, if instead of saying, why does the professor refuse the man's offer? And if instead it was, what can be inferred about why the professor refuses the offer? If this was the question, then yes, maybe you could choose option B, that she prefers that he spend his time on another project. But that's not the question, right? The question is asking for something that was explicitly mentioned and said by the professor. They are not asking you to draw any conclusions. And if you guys chose option B, you would be drawing conclusions, right? Because she didn't say this in any moment. She didn't say, well, actually, I prefer that you do this other thing instead. She didn't say that, so it's not option B, right? What she said is option A and option C. So make sure that when you guys are dealing with detailed questions, you choose an option that was explicitly mentioned, not an option that you think could be the actual reason. Okay, don't make any inferences, don't draw any conclusions, stick to what was explicitly said. That would be my tip for these detailed questions as well. Okay, guys, is that okay? Do you guys have questions about this one? All right, let's move on to the next.
Why does the professor talk about speciation?
This is called function and purpose. Okay. Now, this is not a detailed question because she didn't explicitly say, well, I'm talking about speciation because that's not what she said, right? This does require to be logical. So you do have to draw some conclusions here. You do have to use the information that you had in the conversation as evidence to prove one of the options. Function and purpose requires you to do that, to go beyond what was explicitly said and to try to see the reason why they are doing or they are saying something. So in this case, why do you guys think the professor talked about this speciation?
The last one.
Okay, do you guys agree?
Yes, the last one.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, it is the last one, to demonstrate how varied in Adams' research has been, because she said, so actually Dean Adams' research is very versatile, right? That's what she said. It's something very varied, very versatile. She's done research in different areas. And then she's like, for example, she's done work in Indonesia, she's done work in South America about speciation. So she's giving examples to prove how varied her research has been, right? It's not to describe the focus of the work, because the focus of the work was to enter the database, right? To enter the journals. They are not talking about a new research area in ethnology, not at all. They're talking about Dean Adams' work. So this is not the correct choice either. To explain what Dean Adams chose to work on in Indonesia, no, right? Because she didn't work on this on Indonesia. She worked on this, I think, in South America, if you paid attention to the details. So it is option D. And finally, let's go to the next and final question.
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
There's not much glory in it, but we're looking for someone with some knowledge of anthropology who can enter the articles. I hesitate to mention it, but I don't suppose this is something you would.
Why does the professor say this?
I hesitate to mention it, but I don't suppose this is something you would.
So why does the professor say that?
The first one, probably.
Okay. You guys agree?
I think it's the second.
Second?
Maybe a second.
Okay, so yeah, it's the second. The professor says, I hesitate to ask, but I don't suppose this is something that you would like to do, right? So that's basically a way of asking somebody to do something. Like if I wanted to ask you guys to, let's say, I don't know, help me out with anything, I could say, hey, I don't know, I don't think that you would be willing to do this, would you? But it's just a polite way of asking, right? She's not expressing doubt about the guy's qualification for the project because we know that she chose him for a reason, right? She chose him because she is studying something related to the area and she is interested in Dean Adams' research. So she's not doubting the man's qualifications, right? She's not like, well, I don't think you're qualified to do this, but instead it's like, I don't know if you're interested in doing this, right? To ask if the man is willing to do the project. So this is the same, purpose and function questions. And again, they ask you to be logical, right? To interpret things. You don't need to have your notes for this because you will listen to the part of the conversation again. So as you guys probably saw, most of the questions ask you about big ideas. They won't ask you about specific details too much, except for the detailed questions. My suggestion then is take notes only on the details. And instead of focusing too much on writing everything down, try to understand the context, understand the big ideas behind what's happening, behind what they're saying, right? Try to be part of the conversation. Try to imagine that you're there, you know? So, and as you can see, the questions, I wouldn't say they are too complicated. They are usually along these lines. We're gonna continue practicing tomorrow. We're gonna be seeing different conversations to see different types of topics as well, but they are usually like this. What do you guys think now? Do you have any questions about what we did today, about the conversations, the question types, anything at all?
The two conversation of the test will be the same, or technically like this.
All the conversations will be like this, you know, the student wants or needs something, and the professor is supposed to help the student with that. But of course, they can change the subject or the topic as they go, as they speak. Any other question? Okay, guys, then tomorrow in your practice session, we'll continue practicing. And after we're done, well, tomorrow we'll be looking at the website that I was telling you about so that you can also practice on your own. We'll probably be practicing from the same website. And I'll be sending you the presentation to our WhatsApp chat after the class. Okay, guys, please, before you go though, don't forget today's survey. And I would be seeing you guys tomorrow night. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Then.
Thank you.